Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me and I hope you enjoy the show. I'd just like to take a moment to tell you about a book that I've written. It's a memoir called Fool Me Twice, and it's a story about my life with a focus on my journey internet dating, where I was scammed and injured in the process. It's an educational book that will help many other people not to get caught in the same trap that I was. I'd like to also take this opportunity to play my book promo for you. Here it is.
From life on a farm in rural Australia, where wide open spaces made a young woman yearn to know what was beyond her country town. She moved to the city, became a mother, and found her dream career which took her across the world. But still, something was missing. In her search for love, she traveled far, trusted deeply. She wanted so badly to find someone that she almost lost herself in the process and learned some hard lessons along the way. Fool Me Twice, a new memoir by Jules Hannaford. Available August 20th on Amazon.
A warning to our listeners, some of the topics discussed in this podcast may be disturbing. If you need support, please contact your local crisis line or helpline. And if you're in Hong Kong and you'd like to call the Samaritans hotline, you can call them on 2896 0000. Today I'm here with Tegan Smyth. Hi Tegan, thanks for joining me today.
Hi Jules, thanks for having me on the show.
It's really great that you're here, especially given you landed from London this morning. So that's real commitment. So thank you so much for coming along. Tegan, please tell me a little bit about your work with Table of Two Cities. What is that and what do you do?
Table of Two Cities is a community project that I started nearly 2 years ago, and basically it is giving refugees a platform to tell their stories and share their culture in their own words. I started it in Hong Kong. I had the idea for a while. It's grown. I guess in the last year it's really exploded. We've had a lot more public events, but basically we try and find different ways for refugees to get involved in the social life of Hong Kong where they can give something of themselves to the wider community.
Fantastic. And what was the motivation for you to do that? Why did you want to help refugees to really share their skills and their knowledge with members of the Hong Kong community?
By background, I'm an Australian lawyer, and when I did my legal training, I was actually in a community legal centre. So we gave free legal assistance to refugees, new migrants in Sydney. I felt that although we were helping on the legal side of things, there were lots of other issues that weren't being addressed, like the feeling of anxiety, isolation, alienation, and stigma that they feel from the rest of the wider community. I moved to Hong Kong for work reasons about 4 years ago, and I realized that actually the situation here is even worse. I already had in my head that I wanted to do something that was more community oriented rather than focusing on something legal, and that's really how the idea came about.
Why do you think things are even worse here for refugees in Hong Kong rather than Australia?
Australia doesn't have the greatest human rights record, especially with refugees, but at least in Australia, we have a thing called community detention. So if you arrive by boat, you'll be sent to Manus or Nauru, but if you arrive by plane, you might be in community detention, but you'll actually be onshore in Australia for a couple of years, perhaps, before you're given protection status. And so a lot of the clients that we helped before were of this category. In Hong Kong, in contrast, refugees don't get protection under international laws. So they can be here for decades and they can't go back to where they came from because Hong Kong has signed another treaty, which means that they can't actually repatriate someone to a place they'll be tortured. So a lot of people, 11,000 people, are in this limbo space where they can't be processed because Hong Kong doesn't recognize refugee law, but they can't also be sent back. So in a way, it's worse.
Being protected by the detention centres in Australia, do you mean that they had a roof over their head and that they have food and that they have medical help and that sort of stuff?
I mean, when I talk about community detention, I talk specifically about people that are living in the main cities like Sydney and Melbourne. So initially they might be in a detention centre like Villawood, but then eventually they're out in the community and they're on a subsidy, but they will be eventually on a protection visa. So I'm not at all talking about people that are like offshore because that's definitely inhumane and not legal. But I think the difference is at least people have an element of hope because they know that at the end, especially since Australia is legally bound by this convention, you know, something will happen. They will at least have an end in sight. They might be able to rejoin their families. In Hong Kong, I really feel that we sort of have a very visceral knowledge about refugee legal issues. So that's why, in a way, we are in this situation.
What do you mean by visceral?
Well, I think we don't really understand the terms around refugee, asylum seeker and migrant, and often they're quite conflated. And so we look at people coming here even though they have real, tangible reasons for leaving their home country, but we automatically quite frequently think that they have come here by choice or they're an economic migrant. And I feel we have that kind of knee-jerk reaction. So we sort of are basing it perhaps on rhetoric from politicians rather than actual facts and actual reason.
So the difference between a migrant and a refugee is that refugees are escaping war, crimes,
right,
danger in their own country,
exactly,
and they're coming here not necessarily voluntarily, whereas a migrant chooses to move here. Is that
yes,
the difference?
Yes, that's right. And within refugees and asylum seekers, refugees are people that fall under a category of protection under the Refugee Convention. So they've left for a political reason, religious reason, or because they're part of a social group that would be excluded. Asylum seekers are people that also feel persecution, but for whatever reason, what they are fearing, it doesn't actually fall under the Refugee Convention. So
that's
it's like
interesting.
falling short of being a refugee.
Not all refugees are seeking asylum.
All asylum seekers are seeking asylum. However, not all asylum seekers are refugees. That's probably the distinction I'd make. Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't all refugees coming to somewhere like Hong Kong seek asylum? Does that mean they don't seek asylum because they don't fit into the right categories, like they're not in danger for their life if they were to go back? Is that right?
I think the thing is there are asylum seekers that come here that do have reasons why they don't feel like they could go back, but they might fall out of, I guess, the reasons that people would ordinarily associate with refugees, like leaving a war-torn country. I guess there's less of an awareness that you can be a refugee for political reasons.
If people come to Hong Kong as an asylum seeker or a refugee, what kind of support do they get from the government when they first arrive here?
So Hong Kong has a contractor that gives them a subsidy every month. So they get $1,200 for food, and it's in park and shop vouchers. They get $1,500 for rent. They get 200 Hong Kong dollars for transport, and that's it. They can't work.
Wow. Just to let people who aren't in Hong Kong know that that is so low. Like the average rent for somebody renting quite low in Hong Kong would be 10 to 15,000 a month. And transport costs could be anywhere up to 2,000 to 3,000 a month. And I'm sure families' food bills run into the many thousands as well per month. So that is such a small amount of money. It would be almost impossible to live on that. They must rely then on community support from different groups. Yeah.
So there are a couple of great NGOs that exist in Hong Kong in this space, like Justice Centre, Christian Action as well. So there are actually dedicated NGOs that deal with the different needs, but the majority of, I guess, the assistance comes from the government and perhaps falls short of something that's actually livable. But this falls under this policy of not wanting Hong Kong to be a magnet for refugees.
You want to not only help refugees find their feet in Hong Kong, but you want to give them something meaningful to make them feel valued within the community. Is that right? Is that why you started Table of Two Cities?
Yeah, I'd say that's the main reason. I respect and I value the work that NGOs do, and I by no means am replacing it. But what I'm doing is giving a creative outlet to people, because when you suffer from trauma and there are very few social services and welfare services available to you, it is important to have the ability to tell your story and also have a creative outlet. And that is definitely through food. I think food is a very universal medium to communicate your understanding of the world.
It is, and it's something that everybody has to eat.
Exactly.
And also it's a way of sharing joy and building community, isn't it? When we all eat together, absolutely. Which is really nice.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, storytelling is one of the oldest mediums for connecting with people as well.
Absolutely.
So are you really marrying cooking and eating and storytelling all together?
Absolutely. That's exactly what this is. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. So tell me one of the more compelling stories that you've heard while you've been working with the refugees on the Table of Two Cities program.
Yeah, I think it's hard to pick one because everyone's story, it just has this gravitas that really makes you think, wow, people really have it difficult. I think one of the stories that really struck me and that I think about is in my mind because it's not the typical asylum seeker story that you would hear. So one of the ladies that was involved in my project, she's actually Indonesian, and she started off for life in Hong Kong as a foreign domestic worker. While she was employed here, she contracted HIV. And so she was given a routine medical by her employment agency. And they found out that she had AIDS, but she wasn't told that she actually had anything wrong with her. So they terminated her and they told her that she had 14 days, I think it's 14 days to return to Indonesia. But she didn't know what was wrong with her because she didn't really have a livelihood in Indonesia. She decided to overstay, but she got progressively sick and she finally went and got medical assistance and they found out that she has AIDS. She's HIV positive. When I interviewed her, she was on antiretrovirals for about a year. So she actually had a very undetectable amount of, the viral load in her system. So she was able to function, and she was actually 8 months pregnant at the time. And I think the reason why it sticks out to me is because people think that refugees have to come from a war-torn place. But they don't realize that actually for health reasons, you can be so stigmatized by your society that in a place like Indonesia, she would actually have a very high chance of not surviving because her community is so conservative that she would not feel that she can get any kind of medical assistance. It's not accessible because it's just not affordable at all. And a lot of people with HIV actually die in Indonesia. So this was actually a protection claim that I encountered before when I was doing legal training. There was someone from Indonesia that was trying to seek asylum in Australia for the exact same reason.
Wow, that's intense. So was that story from Hong Kong?
It was from Hong Kong, yeah.
So why wouldn't they tell her that she had HIV? That is almost inhumane. Well, it is inhumane.
It is inhumane, yeah. I think because they just felt that they did not have the onus to do so. They just thought, well, our liability is if someone gets HIV from her working for them. So they just terminated her contract and just cut ties and didn't tell her. And I think that part of the story, I feel that, she suffered so long and she got really sick and she just
didn't know what was wrong.
She didn't know what was wrong and she didn't have to wait that long.
That's heartbreaking. And we all know with HIV and AIDS that the sooner you get hold of the antiretrovirals, the better chance you have of living a normal, healthy life.
Absolutely.
And it still can be done. You still can live a healthy life.
Yeah.
Is she able to access the antiretrovirals through the government here in Hong Kong?
Yeah, and that's another reason for her staying. I mean, even though she can't work, even though, it's really not much of a life, she actually is able to get antiretrovirals. I think that I wouldn't comment too far on the health policies around refugees, but I think something like AIDS, they would actually give you antiretrovirals. So she has a greater likelihood of being able to thrive here. And she just had her daughter. So, and her daughter tested negative.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Great. Did she make a choice to overstay in Hong Kong before she knew she was HIV or after?
I think she knew something was wrong with her, but she didn't know that she was actually HIV positive definitively. But she just felt that health was just falling apart. She was just feeling so sick, couldn't move. And I think she just sort of came from very difficult circumstances in Indonesia, so much so that she had to become a foreign domestic worker in the first place.
So she just instinctively knew that staying here would probably be better for her health and well-being. Wow. Oh, my gosh. I wish her all the best. I hope that she's really recovering and doing well.
Yeah, thanks.
What's the current situation with refugees in Hong Kong? You mentioned 11,000. Are there 11,000 refugees here?
So that's the official statistic. But in reality, I think the number's quite a lot higher than that, because I don't think the statistic actually measures all of the children of refugees that are actually born in Hong Kong, because a lot of these children are actually born stateless and, they don't have a Hong Kong ID card or any document aside from their birth certificate that signifies that they're even here. So I think that the number's probably a great deal higher than that. There's also people coming every time, but that's the official number, I guess.
And can you tell me some of the really positive stories or the personal growth that you've seen from some of the people that you've been working with?
I actually have a guy who assists as a writer. Of course, with refugees, they can't work. So everything is done on a voluntary basis. As a member of Refugee Union, you are able to help your wider community. So he is a member of Refugee Union now. And basically, he was a journalist back in his home country in West Africa. He was also a law student. And I think because, in a way, I saw a lot of similarities in terms of my own career and my own aspirations, I felt that someone like him not being able to work, volunteer, or do anything, just being in this perpetuity of not knowing what's going to happen, is very destructive. So I've actually given him some room to write for me and write stuff on the blog and help me coordinate events and basically have a greater accountability to the refugee community. I think that is so important. And I feel maybe with some projects, it's not necessarily the focus, but for me, it definitely is. So he's had tremendous growth. He's written some really brilliant articles and he's feeling much more confident in his abilities as a writer. And I can just see a dramatic change in his mood from like when I first met him to now. And he's just so passionate about Table of Two Cities as well. So I guess that's like the most sort of clear example of personal growth, but there are others as well.
That's beautiful. That's lovely. I can imagine having that sort of sense of purpose and that ability to be creative and that ability to make a difference and build your skills must be so good for self-esteem. It's good for all of us to have those opportunities, isn't it?
Absolutely. For you and I both as well. Yeah.
So that's really great. And is there any opportunity for him to actually work or get hired? Can refugees assimilate into the working community and get visas in Hong Kong?
In terms of that, I guess the majority of people are asylum seekers, so they're still having their claims heard. So there are a very, very small number of people that have actually been deemed to be refugees, and so they have the right to work. So actually quite a few of my friends are refugees that have now got the right to work but had to wait for the status determination. So it is possible, but I think it's a very small number. Unfortunately, it's extremely small. It's probably less than 200 people of that group of 11,000.
Wow.
So tiny processing rate. Yeah.
How long does it normally take for this whole asylum seeking, moving to refugee process to take? There's probably a name for it and that's not it.
So previously, the UN body, the UNHCR, was in Hong Kong and they were determining refugee claims. But now Hong Kong has its own system in place called the USM, Unified Screening Mechanism. So in a way, it's not determining if someone is a refugee, but it does lead to a refugee determination. It's actually determining whether they are a torture claimant. So it's using the Convention Against Torture, which is the one Hong Kong is bound under legally, as I guess the basis of determining refugee claims. That's it in a nutshell. In terms of how long it takes, I know a few guys who are from Somalia. I think it took upwards of 5 years. I know a woman from Democratic Republic of Congo. She's been here for 7 years. Her husband's been here upwards of 12 years, and they only have just been successful in the last month or two.
Wow, it takes so long. And it would be very hard to prove these torture claims from here.
Absolutely.
Wouldn't it? It's really down to he said, she said.
Hearsay, totally.
Hearsay. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
She's a lawyer, everyone. Can you tell? So you do some work in schools. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Oh, yes. Thanks to you.
Yeah, it was great. You came into my school and, tell me how it was from your perspective and from the women who came in to work with my students.
We had two women who are part of Refugee Union, one from Sri Lanka, one from Uganda. Actually, the chairwoman of Refugee Union is from Uganda. So they were doing demos about some of their preferred dishes and showing kids about their culture and discussing what they do in their country and why this particular food is important to them. So from their perspective, they really enjoyed it. They really love the ability to teach people, to show people something about themselves. I think we all do. It's not just refugees who want that, but I recognize that it's an innate need that people desire. They want to transfer something of themselves or their knowledge to others. And so when you're precluded from that, it really makes you feel that you're not valued. So they really enjoyed it. I think the kids liked the food as well.
I think the students absolutely loved it. And both women brought something really unique to the program. And it was a small group of students who were involved. We were doing a Year 8 community service project, and these students had chosen to work with refugees. So they gathered, you guys sent in the recipe, they gathered all the materials, and we used our cooking room at school, and they got all the food and everything. And then they were just really involved in the cooking. And is it Adela from West Africa? What was her name?
Adela. She's from Uganda. So
that's right. She's from Uganda.
Lakes, yeah.
So she was really clearly already a teacher and had some teaching experience. And her stories and the sharing of her life before she came to Hong Kong and working with young people and the way that she was able to instruct the students was just lovely. And then the other lady from Sri Lanka, she was amazing as well. And she had a really gentle, kind nature, and she was so patient with the students. But I think what was wonderful to see was all of the students connecting with these women and really learning about other cultures through food and their stories. And also it helped them to really recognize the value of what refugees have to offer and how we're all equal.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that something that you feel that refugees are lacking, that sense of equality and respect in the community?
I definitely think that discrimination and the inequalities, it is something that is hugely prevalent in Hong Kong and in the refugee community, because a lot of it is South Asian or African. They definitely, in a place like Hong Kong, experience racism and high levels of policing and over-visibility in the criminal justice system and racial profiling, the whole gamut, right? So I think that the fact that we are trying to bring people together and understand each other over something that's really quite neutral is good. And I think it's important, because otherwise we would just be thinking about the political reasons why we would exclude one or why we feel a particular way about a particular group. And it's often based on very limited knowledge and very real, actual experience. So I think it's important.
And I'm not sure if you'd be able to answer this question because you're kind of speaking for other countries, but is it similar for refugees around the world, this kind of treatment, or is Hong Kong particularly not as welcoming and a little bit more politically unaware, or do you think it varies from country to country quite significantly, or is it all fairly similar?
I would say that the feeling of distrust for refugees is pretty universal. And I think that especially with the refugee crisis that sort of eclipsed the refugee crisis of the 20th century after the war, I think people do feel that level of distrust. But I think in a place like Hong Kong, it's, a younger system. It's a system that is not as mindful or aware of, world events. And I think often we kind of live in a bubble. And I guess people feel that there's other problems that we should be looking at instead. But I wouldn't exceptionalize Hong Kong and say that everywhere else in Asia is better. I think Japan doesn't have a great record either, Singapore as well. So I think maybe compared to the open door policy of Germany, it's a very sort of stark black and white difference. But I wouldn't say that Hong Kong is really the worst, but I'd say that it really isn't a standout either.
Yeah, so there's still some learning and some change that can happen here.
Exactly.
Why would people choose to come to Hong Kong? Is it because it's a bit closer and more accessible?
I think that's part of it. I think also for some people that come from parts of Africa, initially when you get here, you don't need to get a visa, or, it's fairly easy to procure a visa as opposed to, say, the US or other Western countries.
Do you think that there's a lot of support for refugees from private corporations in Hong Kong?
Well, I don't want to speak for all. I think that in general, most corporations do want to have some degree of corporate social responsibility programs. But in my own experience, actually working in finance, I think refugees are not really a topic that people really care too much about in Hong Kong. I feel it's easier to support something about animals or,
People love to support animals. Look at YouTube. The most popular videos are all animal videos.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Animals and children really draw people's emotions, don't they?
Absolutely.
And they capture their empathy more than perhaps refugees.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think there's much more in the way of programs for children or programs about animals, and I am by no means slagging that off, but I think that there's less an awareness. Once I can actually recount this experience, once at a firm that I used to work at, I mentioned that I worked with refugees and I wanted to do something. And actually what it was going to be was giving Francophone, so French-speaking refugees, English lessons, and basically getting a few of my colleagues who are French people to help do the lesson. And because what I noticed from the community as someone that speaks French, I noticed that a lot of them feel very alienated because the dominant language for the refugee community is English. And so if you speak anything else, be it French or Arabic, you can't even participate in that refugee community.
The isolation would be even greater, wouldn't it?
It's huge. Yeah. But I got so much pushback from the CSR coordinator. She just said, oh, it's too political. I think refugees, it's something that Hong Kong people won't support. And, maybe she was just scared about doing it. Eventually, we were able to persuade her, and we actually did have a pilot program last year where we were teaching these Francophone refugees English. And that was really, really well received. And they were so happy with that. But it didn't come without struggle.
Yeah, and that's a shame, isn't it? Shame people just can't jump on board and be supportive of anybody that's trying to do some sort of community service.
Exactly.
Or make a difference in the life of anyone that's underprivileged.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm hoping that podcasts like this and your Table of Two Cities events and all the work that Impact Hong Kong are doing and Christian Action and all of that permeates into the community and starts to open people's eyes a little bit more. And we essentially are a community of people that care. We're a very caring, safe community. And which is another reason why people might come to Hong Kong, because it is so safe as well. So it'd be nice to see that changing. What do you get out of this work with refugees personally?
I've thought about a question like this and how to answer it. And I've thought about the reason that I'd give if I was to sort of, I guess, toe the line and, say something diplomatic. But I think the truth is I owe the truth to younger people who have experienced similar things to me. I'm a survivor of assault. And I think that in a way, doing something for other people is a way that I can navigate my own trauma. And actually, a lot of the female refugees that I do work with, they've experienced similar things, almost universally, a lot worse. And I think that it's good to have that outlet where you want to do something positive from a bad experience. And that is sort of what I get out of it. I don't get any financial gain out of it. And that's not what the point of this is. I have a full-time job.
Yeah, so do I.
Yeah, and, the sort of financial aspect, or I guess recognition as well, is not something that I seek. It's really just finding a way to hold space for people that do not have a space opened up for them.
And I guess in a way there are so many, particularly female refugees, but male as well, that would have experienced some sort of physical, emotional or sexual trauma in their lives.
Absolutely.
So you having gone through your own experience of assault would mean that you would be able to connect with them on a greater level than somebody who hasn't had that experience.
Absolutely.
Would you agree?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that obviously it's not something to wish on anyone and it's a terrible thing to happen, but I think for the most part it does give you empathy, and empathy is a gift. And if you can use your empathy for good, if you can use your experiences for good and actually strive to make something worthwhile out of things, that's great. I mean, I was very studious I worked really hard. I got into a very prestigious law school and one of the most prestigious unis in Australia. So I think for me, when this all happened in my early 20s, I just felt that everything was just crashing down, everything that I worked so hard for. And kind of being in this hyper-competitive environment, not really knowing where to go, you feel so directionless. And I think for me, I got to a point where I thought, I either end everything here, at 21, and I did actually make an attempt on my life, or I do actually find a way to find purpose. And that's what I've really tried to strive and do. And I think the reality is this is always going to happen to people, and people don't have a role model or a mentor or someone to tell them that you can actually continue and you can do things. And I just didn't have that, because while this was all happening, I had people at my university coming in saying, you should apply for this corporate legal job in this high-flying firm. And I just thought, I'm just feeling so broken inside. I can't conceive of that being a reality for me.
Do you think that that's a symptom of coming from Hong Kong in particular? It's such an insular, safe society where that kind of crime is very, very limited, and we don't really know it or see a lot about it in the papers. And if it's going on, we really don't hear about it. So do you feel that response was really a product of you being a Hong Kong kid?
I think definitely it was just not something to think about or talk about. I mean, I'm sure it happens a lot in Hong Kong, but we think that at the end of the day, it's a very safe city. You can walk around late at night as a woman, and often you won't be the target of various things. I mean, the fact is both of these times that happened to me were not in Hong Kong, and actually not even in Australia, but they could happen anywhere. And I think the reality is a lot of people live with this. I've become more candid about my story because I've just met an overwhelming amount of women and some men that have just not been able to tell anyone. And I think the sort of breaking point for me was one of my older friends had it happen to her, and she had a really serious incident because it involved like an ex-partner, and she was actually pregnant at the time, and she couldn't even tell her family about it. And I thought, if I ever kind of get to a point where I'm okay talking about it, I will, because people need to know that there is a light afterwards. There is something you can do. And there often isn't that mentorship or anyone that can really tell you that. And I had to figure that out myself.
Did you find support, or did you just really heal through your work with refugee programs, or did you get other support as well?
The healing process is ongoing. I think that I can't really sort of say that I'm totally healed, but I think that doing something purposeful with refugees definitely helps me a lot. It does make me kind of put things into perspective, but it also makes me realize that I've lost something, and everyone here is a survivor as well in their own way, and they've lost many things. And so if you have some degree of privilege and some degree of access to things, you should, as far as possible, open up space for people. And that's really why I think this is important, why I think grassroots projects are important, especially where you crowdsource community input, which is what Table of Two Cities does.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And if somebody out there is listening and they have just gone through some sort of assault or some sort of trauma, what advice would you give to them? What should they do so that they don't find themselves in the same situation that you were in?
I think realize that it's not your fault. It's never your fault. Realize that, unfortunately, a lot of people out there have gone through it as well. But knowing that you're not alone, there are resources that you can look into, and everyone deals with it differently. But in a way, if you're able to find a community where you can tell your truth and find certain resources or crisis resources especially that can help you, that is great as well. But don't give up. I know that sounds really terribly cliche.
No, but it's true. And tomorrow will be a better day.
Exactly.
So when you feel at that point of where you can't go on or you want to end your life, if you can hang in there till the next day and then seek the support that's out there for everybody, but you've got to be able to find it, things can change and they can get better. And like you said, I think connecting with other people who understand and can empathize and know what you've been through is a way to begin the healing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And if anyone out there is in a crisis right at that moment, if you're in Hong Kong, there's a Samaritan hotline you can call. It'll be in my show notes. And if you're in other countries, there's a lifeline or a crisis line in most countries. So Google that and call somebody and ask for help because you are not alone. Thank you so much for sharing that part of your story. That's extremely courageous and super helpful for other people who will be listening who've gone through something similar.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you. And I've got my own story, and it's in a book called Fool Me Twice, and you can buy it on Amazon. I was scammed and injured in internet dating, so a little plug for that. Yoo-hoo! And it comes back a little bit to Brené Brown's vulnerability and owning your story, and that if you can own your story, then it can help other people come to terms with their story and overcome the guilt or the shame or the trauma or whatever emotion it is that they are feeling.
Definitely.
It can help them to explore that emotion and overcome it in many ways, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you share your story specifically, or is it more of an unspoken connection that you have with these people?
I have shared my story sometimes with people, but I guess that it's not something I kind of feature greatly because for the most part, it's about them. It's not about me. And I think I don't necessarily like the limelight. I don't like taking up space, and I'm very mindful of that too. I think when it comes up and, people talk about it, I'm at least able to say, I've experienced this as well. I understand how hard it is. And I think sometimes people find comfort in that. That's definitely happened.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm proud of you. It's not easy to do. That's really amazing. Good for you. In an ideal world, what would life look like for a refugee in Hong Kong? If you could wave a magic wand, what would you like to see happen?
I think I'd like people to be given the right to work. I think the fact that people are here for so many years and they have talents that they have brought over, they're often very highly skilled people, highly educated people. The fact that they are spending years, even decades, just not being able to do anything with that knowledge, I think it's a terrible thing. So I would like for refugees to be given the right to work, or at least some way of making a livelihood, and for people to understand that this is not necessarily creating that so-called magnetic effect of attracting undesirable people. These are people that actually can be an economic asset to you.
With your tables for 2 cities, the refugees involved in that able to make any money from the food that they cook or the events that you hold?
So they can't make money in the sense of a salary, and we don't have any contracts with them, so they're not working. We work specifically with people from refugee unions, so they actually have the right to volunteer. So what we do is we give them a subsidy for transport and also an allowance for the food that they make. Basically, I guess what's in it for them is they have the catharsis of being able to tell their story and see it in print and being able to have creative control over it. But also it's an entirely sponsored, really huge meal, like basically a feast that they can have with their family and friends. And, that's the other value that they have in that. In the ideal world, I'd love for people to actually be able to work, but obviously it's just a handful that actually have the legal right to work here.
Hopefully, slowly things will change. Well, more quickly than slowly.
Yeah.
What are some of the key events that you've done for Tables of 2 Cities?
We just had a World Refugee Day event. So that was in June. And since we've started the project, we've been observing World Refugee Day. And I guess it's something quite popular to acknowledge in Hong Kong, but in terms of what we do, we really want to center things around food and for people to actually have the ability to meet the people behind the project, to understand what's going on, see the food in person, try it, speak to people, and really just not make it difficult for people to actually, if they're curious, ask the right questions. Another really great event that I'd love to repeat, and so shout out to Justice Centre for this. During
Ramadan, you're listening, Justice Centre?
In May, because it was Ramadan, we were organising an iftar sort of independently. A couple of volunteers who are regulars with Table of 2 Cities help organise.
I'm sorry, what's an iftar?
Oh, an iftar is when you break the fast in Ramadan.
Oh, okay, sorry, I didn't know that. Thanks for explaining that.
No, it's the first meal they have at sundown, and so they do the call to prayer and then they have the breaking of fast. And I hope that I didn't butcher that because actually this year was the first iftar I ever attended.
I'm sure they'll forgive you if you did.
Yeah, but Justice Centre, they had organised their own and they contacted us and said, we would really like to organise another one for some of Refugee Union because they're not necessarily in our pool of clients, but we know that not every asylum seeker or refugee has the space to break the fast and somewhere that's like a nice environment. So they extended that to us. And so we had an iftar together and it was absolutely brilliant.
How many people were involved in that?
We had an army of volunteers who were helping out with things. But in terms of the actual refugees attending, it was about 20 people. And they'd previously had an iftar that had like the same amount of people. Obviously, the Muslim community is much bigger, but this was our very first iftar event. But I think the fact that we were able to, hold space for something so significant of such cultural and religious significance for people that's centered around food, that was really amazing to do.
That is amazing because through the food, you're embracing culture, but doing something like that, you're embracing other people's cultures in even more depth. And that's a really beautiful thing because we are such a multicultural society here in Hong Kong. There are 42 different nationalities of students just in my school.
Wow.
And that just goes to show how multicultural Hong Kong is. And it's great to do that. And I'm just thinking, I can see an amazing CAS opportunity for students here if they wanted to get involved with you. I don't know if there's any room for IB students who have to do creativity, activity and service for them to support you. But I can see that this would be an amazing opportunity for young people to not only do their CAS for school, but to really give back to the community and also learn something really meaningful about the world and themselves.
Yeah, that's definitely something I'd like to perhaps explore in future. And I think in terms of the volunteers that I have that regularly help me, I'm open to almost everyone. And
do you have enough or not enough, or do you have more than you need?
We have a good number because we have a lot of people that have contacted us at various times and we've not had an event every single time. So we do have, I guess, a bit of a backlog. But whenever we have a public event, we send a blast to everyone.
Well, blast me. I reckon
exactly.
I can help.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can round the troops up.
I'll hear you up. But yeah, in terms of students helping, actually, I got a friend's daughter who's 15 to help teach some refugees how to use Instagram. There's actually lots of things that kids can do.
Yeah, I want to come. I want to learn how to use Snapchat. I cannot work it out. I tried and I gave up. I deleted it off my phone. I can't work it out. Yeah, it's amazing. Like, it's so funny when I'm teaching. If I have any struggles with anything online, I'm just like, kids, come fix it. They do. They come out. They sort it out. Oh, no, thank you so much. It's like I'm getting paid to teach you, but yeah, you're teaching me.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. How can we, as a community, make a difference and help change the negative perceptions you were talking about that refugees face on a global scale?
I think everyone can do their part, and I think that any contribution is good. I think maybe targeting in the contributions better. Sometimes, and this is a comment, not just myself, I'm actually sort of regurgitating what a couple of people from NGOs have told me. A lot of people, I guess, give bags of rice to NGOs on the expectation that all refugees are basically in a camp somewhere and don't have access to running water. I think the reality is a lot of refugees are in the urban landscape. And one of the things that, we can do that's meaningful is just reach out more to refugees, make things that are more inclusive and accessible to refugees because many are here to stay. You can learn a lot from them. I think becoming friends with one perhaps and going from there, because once you actually put a name and a face together and you look at them as a person rather than their legal status, you'll begin to understand the best way to help them and how to give meaningful assistance. And so I think that's really what I recommend, I guess, people that are interested to consider doing.
Good for you. And how do you manage your corporate job and then all of this NGO work, really?
It's a lot of juggling and it's a lot of balancing different things. So I would say that the key to success is knowing when to delegate.
Oh, I need to take that on. Quick, let me jot that down. I'm terrible at delegating.
I'm still learning. I'm still definitely work in progress on that front. But I think, especially for me, there are times that I'm just working about 50 hours a week. So it's really hard to do all of that and then do Table of Two Cities and the various other projects that I help with. I think understanding when to step back and when to empower people to do something, that's really key. And it's good for them as well. I think, just also making time for self-care because taking on all of this, especially since, a lot of the stories are very, very sad and very difficult to listen to, you need to, I guess, take time to process it. Otherwise, you'll sort of take on too much.
That is such good advice. Do you have any tips for self-care? Like, I like listening to podcasts.
Podcast is great. Yeah.
I love that. That's really my self-care. I listen daily, every day.
Honestly, like, it looks like different things to different people. Like, for me, it might be going on a really long walk, just trying to look at my phone less and be a bit more off the grid. It doesn't have to necessarily be pampering. I mean, pampering is nice if you get a massage or, you get your nails done or something. Like, that's probably what a lot of people do. But I don't think self-care needs to come with a price. All you need to do is really find your medium that like makes sense to you. Like a long walk helps me.
Yeah, find what it is for you that helps you disconnect and relax and feel less stress.
Exactly. Yeah.
How can people out there help Table of Two Cities specifically if they're interested?
You can reach out to us at any time on our Facebook page or Instagram. We also have a website.
All called Table of Two Cities?
Yeah, tableoftwocities.org. So you can reach out on one of those, or you could reach out via email if you like. Anything that you'd like to contact us about, please feel free.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Tegan, thank you so much for meeting with me today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Likewise, yeah.
And I just hope my listeners out there, if you've got any feedback on this episode, or if you'd like to make a difference, or even if you're in another country and you want to know how that you can connect with your local refugee program, send me an email at jules@hongkongconfidential.net and I'll find out for you. I love to do a bit of research and then I'll let you know what you do. Otherwise, I'll just call Tegan and ask her. And if it's in Australia, we might be able to help you.
Yes, we might actually.
So thanks a lot, Tegan. It's been amazing.
Thanks for having me.
Hi, Confidants. I want to tell you about my Patreon page. I've joined Patreon in the hope of getting sponsorship for my Hong Kong Confidential podcast. Patreon is a great way for my listeners to get on board and sponsor me with monthly payments, and that goes towards my production costs and rewards for my members. If you're interested in checking out my Patreon page, please go to patreon.com and search up Jules Hannaford or Hong Kong Confidential. I would really appreciate you visiting my page. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it. I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.